Good morning and welcome. I'm Laura Turner, and I lead corporate social responsibility for TIAA. And we are proud to sponsor the 2020 CIVIC Summit. At TIAA, giving back to our communities is in our DNA. After all, we were born from a single philanthropic act by Andrew Carnegie in 1918 when he started an endowment because he wanted college professors to retire with dignity. Today, we exist to provide financial security for those who work in education, medicine, and the nonprofit sector. If you're interested in learning more about TIAA, I encourage you to click the exhibitor tab after the session. So welcome to Redefining Pro Bono and Skills-Based Volunteering for Current Needs, moderated by Veronica Hayden, who is the Corporate Giving Representative for Xcel Energy. Recognized as an emerging leader by the Association of Corporate Contribution Professionals, Veronica has significant experience managing best-in-class grant-making programs, is dedicated to implementing resourceful strategies and processes that maximize results and impact of philanthropic activities. Veronica has extensive involvement in executive-level organizational responsibilities, including the management of complex corporate budgets, business planning, and process improvement. She also has served on the CIVIC Summit Committee for the last 2 years to make this event successful, so you're in very capable hands. During this session, you will hear from several business leaders who will walk you through how you can redefine pro bono and skill-based volunteering for your organization. From going virtual to increasing impact to supporting racial justice, it's important to think through building and adapting these programs to address current challenges and opportunities. Key elements like strategic planning for how your organization can have a positive impact on all stakeholders, including employees and your partners, should not be overlooked. And of course, making and building the business for these programs to ensure long-term success. Throughout this workshop, we encourage you to send your comments, learnings, and questions on the right-hand side of the screen in the chat area. And don't forget to share what you're learning on social and use the hashtag #BCivicSummit. And join us later this afternoon at the keynote to learn how you could win wine from one of our vineyards in the TIAA portfolio. Thank you all for joining us, and take it away.
Sorry. I had the volume on.
Thank you, Laura, and a big thank you to TIAA for sponsoring the CIVIC Summit and helping us to take it virtual. Good morning, and thank you to all of you who have joined us today. Welcome to your first workshop of the CIVIC Summit. We have 3 knowledgeable and amazing women that will each present for about, followed by a moderated Q&A. So please submit your questions on the right-hand side of the screen at any time throughout the session, and we will get to those questions at the end of the presentation. I would be remiss to not acknowledge Shanda Vangus, who led the charge in pulling this panel together and will also be helping us sort questions for the Q&A. So thank you, Shanda. Now, I don't want to take up any more valuable time, but I would like to provide a brief intro for each of our speakers, and I highly encourage you to read their full bios when you get a chance. First, you will hear from Casey Cortez, Managing Director of Schwab Community Services and Charles Schwab Foundation. As Managing Director, Casey champions the firm's philanthropic efforts, overseeing the day-to-day operations of the foundation, as well as their extensive employee community engagement initiatives. Next, we'll have Elizabeth Schwan Rosenwald, Chief Program Officer for Common Impact. Elizabeth is a recognized expert in cross-sector partnerships, skilled volunteering, leadership development, and capacity building for the nonprofit sector. And finally, we'll have Husna Ali Khan, Associate Director of Global Pro Bono for Pixera Global. Husna's career spans 10 years in social impact programming focused on education, gender, and capacity building. I'll now turn it over to Casey Cortez to kick us off.
Well, thank you so much, Veronica. And I am so excited to be here and have this conversation with everybody today. And first, I thought it would be helpful to really ground this discussion with a high-level overview of our community approach at Charles Schwab. So Schwab Community Services, of which Charles Schwab Foundation is a part, really encompasses 3 bodies of work that is built into our mission. And if we can go to the next slide, it will highlight the mission and the strategic goals of what we try to accomplish. So first of all, our core social issue is financial literacy, and that is the primary focus for all of our national as well as our local charitable efforts. Secondly, we put strong faith in our community engagement and volunteerism initiatives. We really do consider our employees to be one of our biggest assets, both for our business as well as for driving impact in all of our community events. And so we really make a conscious effort to try and leverage their talents and skills in a variety of ways. And then finally, through a variety of communications channels and platforms, we have a strong focus on advocacy as a way to really highlight the critical importance of our social issue, financial literacy, as well as to amplify the impact of our work and all of the good activities being done by our employees. So moving on, the timing of this conversation is absolutely perfect because right now we are in the middle of our 7th annual Pro Bono Challenge event. And the program, when we first launched it, was initially explored in direct response to our employees who wanted to find ways to really have deeper impact in their communities and go a little bit broader than what traditional single session volunteer events could provide. So back in 2014, we piloted our Pro Bono Challenge with 3 locations, and now we host 9 events in 9 of our primary employee centers, and we have seen amazing growth every single year. The other thing I wanted to point out is that we elected to focus our program on supporting nonprofit capacity building needs as opposed to individual direct end user interventions as a way to really achieve scale and impact. And so by working with nonprofits on improving or addressing some of their core functions like marketing or technology solutions or HR challenges, that really allows us to create much greater reach and ultimate impact, since that work is enabling these nonprofits to serve their entire constituent body more effectively. And so initially the program was structured as a single day, 5-hour consulting event that was broken down into 3 different micro consulting sessions. And in that we pair between 4 and 6 Schwabies, our employees, with the specific skills needed for those projects with their nonprofit counterparts. And the number of projects varied based on the size of each of our locations. And we feel like the results speak to our success. So this next slide will tell you some of our historical impact. And over time, we've really focused on measuring both outputs and outcomes for our employees, as well as the impact on our nonprofit beneficiaries. And while some of the core data is important, the things we always as CSR professionals report on, like number of projects, number of volunteers, number of nonprofits involved, we really wanted to get deeper into the most meaningful results by really focusing on that end impact that we are making on our employee participants, on our business, and our nonprofits alike. And while we have plenty of additional data points, here are really what we think are 3 of the most poignant around the impact on professional development, on the reputational lift to the company as we build employee advocates for the firm, and finally, the meaningful difference and the lasting impact that this type of work makes on our nonprofit partners. And I also wanted to point out here that at Schwab, we really do try and take an iterative approach to our measurement work. And every year, as we learn what works and doesn't work, we will add in new metrics that will not only to continue to prove the value, but really equips us with data-driven insights that we can use to lead to ongoing program improvements. And so moving on, if you look at what we feel like are our most important success drivers, they really bucket themselves up nicely into 3 main areas: our program structure, our leadership engagement, and the clarity around project scope. So when we think about the program structure, 2 things I wanted to call out here is, number 1, we provide as detailed expectations as we can so that all of the participants understand the responsibilities, the time commitment, and the anticipated outcomes before they commit to participation. And this really does help ensure a successful engagement because everybody knows what they're committing to before they make that commitment. And hopefully it makes sure that clarity is there and that their engagement is really crystal clear. And the other thing is that over the course of time, we've been able to build out some very turnkey project leader toolkits that help our employees become really prepared they're able to act somewhat autonomously and guide them through the entire program process. So at any point in time, they can reference these materials and make sure that they are able to run the project successfully. And that includes email templates, tracking systems, and more. When it comes to leadership engagement, we know that getting leaders involved can take time and cultivation over the years. But what has been really helpful for us is that our leaders are not just spokespeople. They don't just promote the program and then leave it to everybody else to do, but they roll up their sleeves and they actively participate in the events. And that helps add important credibility to the importance of the program for the firm. It provides an opportunity for them to really lead by example for other people leaders so that those who are managing others feel encouraged to get their people involved. And then finally, it also gives our employees coveted leadership visibility, which we know is very important to all of our employees. And then as we look at the clearly defined project scope, I really can't stress enough how important this is to any successful pro bono challenge event. So being sure that you look at the nonprofit's true capabilities to participate and ensure that the project is scoped to be actionable ensures that the outcomes of the work, that the entire body of the work will be fully utilized. And in addition, it helps employee participants have a better understanding of what that ultimate impact is that they're driving for, and that provides a very high quality experience and ensures that the work is truly as powerful as possible. So then going on, in early February, we were well into our planning phase and anticipating another stellar year, and then, well, 2020, need I say more? Everything you see on the screen, all these major crises, led to the necessary re-envisioning of our entire program strategy. And the Pro Bono Challenge was just one of many programs that we had to adapt. And I think one of the most important things on this slide is that people across the country have much higher expectations than ever as to the role that businesses should and must be playing in responding to these crises and also in meeting the needs of their communities. So let's move on to the pivots that we made. As we were adapting our program, I wanted to point out that we took the time to listen to the needs of both our nonprofit partners as well as our employees, and was very intentional about including their feedback and their advice in our adaptation of the program. And now we do work with Common Impact, and we have been very fortunate to work with them since the beginning of our work in 2014, but they helped us bring the Pro Bono Challenge into a fully virtual event. At first, we were a little concerned about how that would impact employee interest, but that really didn't play out. While we had to spend a little bit more time being thoughtful about communicating and recruiting employees, the number of employees who applied to participate in the challenge increased by 17% over 2019, reaffirming that there is not only strong interest in this particular program, but that our employees were eager and ready to support their communities by volunteering differently, and they were ready to embrace the changes that we were making. Moving on, we went to single-day event to multiple days, so having our 3 sessions spread out over 1 or 2 weeks. And while it created a little bit more management from my core team, overall we're getting very positive feedback about that shift, and I'll touch on that in just a moment. We did, however, despite the employee interest, need to scale down the number of projects overall in response to the current environment. And that was mainly trying to be hypersensitive to nonprofit capacity to participate, while many nonprofits early in the planning were still in survival mode, and quite frankly, a lot of them still are. So we didn't want to put pressure and unrealistic expectations on nonprofits, nor accept improperly scoped projects. In the past, we've really focused our recruiting efforts on a little bit more experienced employee set in order to make sure that they have the skills and the value to add back to the nonprofits. But this year we widened that scope a little bit and have included a broader set of employees, while still making sure that the project leads are the ones with maybe a little bit more tenure with the company and have had experience participating in the Pro Bono Challenge in the past. Now, about 1/3 of the submitted projects have really reflected the new realities of 2020. In the past, we saw more traditional capacity building issues that most nonprofits struggle with from time to time. But again, about 30% of the projects this year really had a strong COVID or a social justice angle. And then finally, we have not really focused a lot on issue-based challenges. We actually tested that out last year, and 8 of the projects in San Francisco, actually all of the projects in that location, were addressing different components of the homeless issue. So it was very relevant to that community. And then based on what we were seeing this year, we wanted to try it again to really test out our ability to prove that we could be nimble and adaptable and responsive in changing environments for nonprofit and community needs. So that really takes us to our key learnings on the next slide. And so the multi-day approach really started driving positive responses before the program actually even began. And what it is doing is providing a little bit more breathing room in between each of the 3 consulting sessions, which gives our employees the sense that they can be a little bit more intentional and thoughtful as they process the needs of their nonprofit counterparts, as they think about potential outcomes, and as they build their recommendations for the nonprofits. And also in this environment right now, it's much more respectful of the nonprofit's time. We don't need to take any leaders away from their organizations for a full day. And so they can continue to be doing their most critical work and then participating over the course of time, which again gives them a little bit more ability to ensure that they're not dropping any of their critical day-to-day issues. In terms of expanding the type of eligible employees, we really have found that that's creating greater opportunities for skills development for more up-and-coming leaders, which is an important part of Schwab's approach to employee development. And then it also allows us to groom future pro bono challenge leaders in a thoughtful and structured way. As I referenced before, testing that issue-based challenge 2 years in a row really has helped us learn how we can be hyper-responsive to immediate needs that nonprofits are facing. And we know we're going to continue to implement that practice in years to come. The virtual format, again, I think while everybody has struggled some with technology in the virtual environment that we're in, it really enabled us to make a few pretty important improvements, again, that we'll be able to apply over time. First, we've been able to tap talent from across the country and ensure that we are properly assigning the right skill sets to the projects without being geographically bound as we were when it was in person. We've also been able to really make sure that we could address wait lists proactively in some locations and some projects. They would fill up rapidly. So instead of only having a select group of employees to fill those spots in a physical location, we could open it up countrywide. And so again, that matching has become more successful. And then finally, I just wanted to touch on the fact that this current environment has really refreshed our commitment and reminded us all that we need to carve out the time to tell the stories of the real impact and personalize the reach and the improvements that we're making on the lives of the individuals, not just stop at telling the nonprofit story, but really making sure we can share how those projects are helping their constituents at the end of the day. So next, I wanted to talk a little bit about how you all might be able to put this into action. And so no matter where you're at in your pro bono journey, we think these are 6 key ideas that you can take that will either help you launch or improve your existing efforts. So first, if you're starting out or maybe just in the early growth phase, give yourself the room to start small or to grow gradually. Working with existing trusted partners in the early phase will allow you to kind of get your sea legs, do some test and learning, and then that will help you before you start to broaden your reach and try and work with maybe some previously unknown nonprofit partners. Next, we all in our profession strive for the nirvana of outcomes measurements, and I can't stress enough how vital it is to really think about and clarify what the key outcomes that you're driving for are prior to beginning your program design, and also making sure you understand the measurement systems that you'll begin to use. And then I encourage you to revisit that at the beginning of every program year, because that way you'll be able to make sure you're intentional about taking what was learned previously and apply it for continuous improvement. Next, not every firm has the ability to work with an expert agency like we've been able to with Common Impact, but there are a lot of very high quality resources out there that you can leverage built by leaders like Common Impact and others, such as capacitycommons.org. And they have a whole slew of resources that can help you assess the readiness of your nonprofits, partners, tips on how to scope a project, et cetera. Then, I know I've already spoken to this, but I don't think that you can not say this frequently enough. But having those clearly defined expectations early on help ensure that you're tackling the right projects with the right partners and this right skilled talent to really drive the deepest impact. Next, as you look at gaining leadership buy-in, starting with 1 or 2 influential advocates can really be helpful, and through them you can demonstrate to other leaders that you're using their leadership time and talent wisely. We all know our leaders have a lot on their plates, and they will be very impressed that you are so respectful of that time. And then ask them not only to be champions for recruitment for the program among your employees, but also to help drive further leadership engagement. This then gets to that last point in that it will help you build other people leader buy-in. And by letting your people managers know that this is a supported activity across the highest level of leadership is really important, and also helping them understand the value that they will get by directly having their employee participation numbers be solid, will move a barrier for interest, for recruitment, and for retention. And then one last thing that I wanted to say here is I wanted to provide a bit of advice for those of you that are just starting out, and that sometimes it's hard to prove value until you actually run a program, but you should leverage the success of other corporate peers to prove the value of these types of programs until you have your own proof points from within the organization. And I know that many of us who have had a lot of experience in the space are happy to share our proof points with you because we know this is so valuable in terms of meeting community needs. And so with that, I wanted to say thank you for the time today, and I am going to turn it over to Elizabeth from Common Impact.
Thank you so much, Casey. I really appreciate that. I just started to talk and I was on mute, so that's the first challenge of a virtual environment. And also I have to give you full credit for the grace and attention to detail in managing through different conversations happening at the same time. So that was just fantastic. I'm delighted to be with you guys today and to talk a little bit about how Common Impact has redefined pro bono and skills-based volunteerism within the current environment. I have to be mindful of the statement current environment, given that there are so many components of our current environment. But truly, it is a unique time period and one that we will need to look at with intentionality in building building volunteerism in ways that have impact. Let's go ahead and move to the next slide. Thank you. So today I'm going to have an opportunity to talk with you about 4 initiatives that Common Impact has had a role in as we look to build skill-based volunteering opportunities within our current environment. The first is the Charles Schwab Pro Bono Challenge that Casey was just talking about with such eloquence. Common Impact has had the gift of partnering with Charles Schwab over the last years of the Pro Bono Challenge and seeing firsthand the impact that Schwabies can have on nonprofits all across the country, and watching the initiative grow, watching it completely go online this year, and seeing how there continues to be incredible interest and desire on the part of the volunteers from stepping in and making a difference. I'm then going to talk to you a little bit about our upcoming Pro Bono Week, Skills for Cities event. For those of you who are not familiar with Pro Bono Week, it is the global celebration of the impact of skills-based volunteering. It happens every year in the last week of October. And Common Impact each year brings together companies from all across a city. In previous year, we've been in Boston, also in New York. This year, we're national, and brings together companies that may not have previously had the opportunity to do skills-based volunteering. I'm going to then share a couple of resources with you about the ways in which we can think about the current environment that we're in, and how we can potentially measure the impact that we're having. But I'm really pleased to be able to start by talking about the Charles Schwab Pro Bono Challenge. Let me tell you a little bit about what this year looks like. Let's go ahead and move to that next slide. Great, thank you. It's been and is a remarkable year. As Casey mentioned, we are deep in the challenge right now. In fact, as we speak, there is a pro bono challenge happening in the Denver area. We have had a tremendous interest in volunteerism, and we've had a 17% increase from last year, with 47% of this year's applicants new to the pro bono challenge. This is remarkable and also truly tells us that people are looking for ways to have an impact, and that the Schwab employees, the Schwabies, want to be engaged in their communities, are eager to be a part of how do we find solutions? What are the differences and the changes that we can make? And how can we meet the challenges of COVID-19? These are unique times. We are hopefully not in our lifetime going to be in very many global pandemics. And Schwab volunteers are stepping up and eager to make a difference. We are, as I said, right in the midst of the Pro Bono Challenge, which makes this the perfect time to have this conversation, but also means that we have not finished the projects that we are working on yet. So I wanted to share an example of a project that we did last year with all of you, and take a moment to look at that experience. Let's go ahead and move to that next slide. Thank you. So this was an initiative that we did last year, and was really a moment in time where we were able to say, Schwab has been working with what was then EARN over the last 5 to 6 years, and they were able to come in as a part of the Pro Bono Challenge and receive new branding and ultimately a new website. And then they ultimately renamed themselves. And now that happened after the Pro Bono Challenge. And the reason I wanted to share Save Her Life's story with you is because it's a fantastic example of how a long-term investment on Charles Schwab's part allowed for and enabled an organization to grow into the need of its community. So Common Impact has been thrilled to partner with Schwab, and we are thrilled to continue that partnership as we serve more organizations and engage more volunteers. Looking ahead till next week, because we aren't dull over here at Common Impact, is our Skills for Cities event. So let's go ahead and move to that next slide. Skills for Cities is a multi-company day of service that supports nonprofits and brings together corporate talent. It is a day in which companies come together with cross-company teams and the opportunity to use their skills to make cities stronger. This year, we are working with 12 different nonprofits with 10 different corporate partnerships, all of them coming together to create impact for each of the organizations. Normally, they're day-long in-person events. This year, they're virtual events, which allows us for the first time to be national and to work across organizations, across cities, in which we're able to really dive deep and support organizations that are BIPOC-led and or focusing on racial justice. Let's go ahead and move to the next slide. Our commitment this year, Common Impact's commitment, was an acknowledgement that BIPOC-led and racial justice organizations often lack the resources and opportunities for resources that so many organizations need in order to grow, thrive, and become sustainable. We made a commitment this year that the organizations we work with would be organizations that are deep in the space of racial equity, and that we would bring corporate volunteers to support their needs. We were very, very lucky to have a number of different companies see how powerful this could be and join with us, bringing their volunteers, bringing their employees to be able to serve these organizations. Let's jump to the next slide, please. Thank you. We know that these are not normal times. We know that nonprofits are being called upon now more than ever in order to serve their communities, to meet the needs, the growing needs that come as a result of COVID, that come as a result of the racial inequities that are being spotlighted, not that are new, but that are being spotlighted currently in the moment in time that we are in. Common Impact has always looked at skills-based volunteering as a way to build unlikely partnerships that would allow us to address the inequities in our communities. This year, our commitment was that the organizations we serve as part of this flagship event would be BIPOC-led and racial justice organizations. Very excited for next week's event and for the impact that we will have bringing together these companies as well as these organizations for a virtual day of service. Moving ahead, we look towards what will be the long-term impact of COVID-19 on the nonprofit sector. The truth is, organizations are going to have to pivot. They're going to have to build out new programming. They're going to have to change how they serve their clients and what clients they're serving. It's going to be a different landscape. And it is our responsibility to make certain that they have the resources that they need. Common Impact took the opportunity to do a deep dive research project to understand what are those needs, how can we meet them? And we identified a few key learnings. Let's go ahead and move to the next slide. Those learnings allowed us to look at what are some of the key needs within nonprofits. We grouped nonprofits based upon their issue areas. We took a moment to think about what type of crisis response organization they are, where they are in serving the needs of the communities, and how we can best support that. We came away with a few key learnings that I'm pleased to share with you today. Let's move to the next slide. Thank you. These learnings allowed us to understand that skills-based volunteering can be used to address the creation of new financial planning, helping organizations think about what to do in a moment in time where financial uncertainties are rampant. We identified that skills-based volunteers that are fluent and skilled in data analysis can help look at how people are engaging and how they're serving their communities, and how we can continue the work of building thriving communities by coming together virtually. We understand that skill-based volunteering tech is a resource. We know that nonprofits need better tech supports, and skill-based volunteering can provide that. And finally, we have to recognize that the knowledge of the corporate sector in how to navigate through these financial uncertainties is something that we can share with the nonprofit sector. We're very pleased to have been able to present this report, to be able to understand better how to serve the organizations that are on the front lines of this work, creating change. I'll wrap up today by sharing with each of you a new report that Common Impact's just put out. So let's go ahead and move to that next slide. That looks at, let's go back one, that looks at the social impact of volunteerism. The truth is, we are in unprecedented times, and we know that we need to continue to look at what is the impact of our work and how are we going to measure that. So in partnership with True Impact and Fair and Levy, we were able to come together and look at two different ways to measure impact. Now we can go to that next slide. Thank you. We can look at skill-based volunteering as to whether or not this is a contribution or an attribution. We can think about how we measure our impact in considering whether or not we are giving of our people and of our resources, or whether or not we are giving of strategies and supports. I'm so grateful to be able to have been with you all today. Thank you so much, and it's my pleasure now to introduce Husan from Pixera Global.
Thank you, Elizabeth and Casey. And I hope that the audience is ready to move to the most dynamic part of this, which is the Q&A. So please, as our facilitators mentioned, get your questions ready. We can go to the next slide. Hello, everyone. My name is Husna Ali Khan, and over the next couple of minutes today, I'd like to talk to you about two programs Pixera Global has developed in response to COVID-19 and the needs of our partners. I'll also share some of our program design learnings during this unique time. And again, during the Q&A, I hope I can provide even more takeaways for you in the audience. Next slide, please. So at Pixera Global, our mission is to reinvent how the public, private, and social sectors engage to solve global challenges. And we love wearing all of those hats, and we are most comfortable being at the middle of that intersection. One of the ways that we solve global challenges is by positioning exceptional corporate leaders in programs that contribute to societal good, as you know, through skills-based volunteering or global pro bono. By this time in the calendar year, we would have deployed hundreds of teams across the globe on immersive, weeks-long engagements to apply their professional skills towards the mission of social impact organizations. And of course, as you can imagine, those programs have come to a halt for now. But what's transpired in the meantime are some pivots to new models. And I'd like to talk about one model in depth and another one very briefly. We can go to the next slide. So at the height of COVID-19 in the US this past spring, the need to reimagine systems was sort of a phrase milling about at our organization virtually, of course, and it came to the forefront for us. We have countless programs that address the needs of a particular organization, and we help them meet their mission through corporate employees. But what we were seeing as a society in transition is that we wanted to explore going broader to promote systems change. Now, our usual route in the program design process is to understand, of course, corporate strategy for programs based on, geography, or if, whether a corporation wants an issues-based focus, for example. This time, it was a little bit different, and I say that in the best way, because at the height of COVID, we realized our engagement needed to be and ended up being community first. So we had a lot of discussions. We sent out a couple of surveys within our network to understand what were the needs at the community level and how might Pixera Global as an organization pivot what we do to serve this need. And this is when the Reimagine series was born. Two organizations came to the forefront and helped us define an initial challenge statement and come up with two challenge tracks. And those organizations painted a picture of what their current constraints were and showed receptiveness to new ideas and having a corporate lens on those issues. Next slide, please. So the result was the inaugural challenge, which is much like a hackathon as part of the Reimagine series. And so with this model, an anchor partner, which is a social impact organization, and I'll get to who those are in a moment, poses a challenge to be addressed by corporate teams. And in this case, we had 40 corporate participants split amongst 4 sub-teams, working towards solutions over about 4 weeks with a little bit of a pre-work period prior to that for preparation, and devoting about 5 hours or so per week towards solutions. Next slide, please. And just to be clear, one note I missed there is that these were multi-company teams, and I'll get to who those companies were in just a moment. So our anchor partners were the National Association of Community Health Centers and Iowa PCA, Iowa Primary Care Association, which provides technical assistance, advocacy, and training to community health centers across the state. NAC, of course, doing that and more on a national level. And based on really some serious enlightenment of what the realities were on the ground, we can go to the next slide here. We were starting to understand what's going on in community health centers and how are these anchor partners trying to meet needs. And we came up with the following issue and challenge statement. 30 million Americans who otherwise would not have access to healthcare were using community health centers. And the issue of telehealth and digital health and everything that comes along with that, with the absence of a strong system, it was severely limiting the ability of these centers to really reach those patients, many of whom are underinsured, uninsured completely, and are vulnerable populations, of course. Next slide, please. So with those anchor partners that we called on board, we reached out to clients, some of whom like SAP and Medtronic Foundation that we've worked with for many years, and some clients like Celanese and BD who are newer to us. And we're looking for more of a short-term opportunity for their employees to engage on COVID-19 issues. Next slide, please. So understanding the problem here, to develop what we called a scoping package to give these teams the ability to move towards solutions in a short 4 weeks, we really invested heavily prior to the challenge period itself and used a variety of tools, which you can see here, to actually understand the issue on a deeper level and prepare the teams to dive in over the course of 4 weeks. Next slide, please. So over the 4 weeks, there are a couple of unique things that we were trying out that are program elements we've used before, but some a little bit different. So there were structured events throughout the 4 weeks for these teams who were, getting to know one another for the first time off the bat. And one of the most important things, I think, was the inclusivity of all of this. So from voice of the customer sessions, which are sort of like a semi-structured interview opportunity, to panel presentations, we were bringing stakeholder voices into the entire process. So during those sessions, we had everyone from rural community health center leaders to federal government level administrators giving input into these solutions. And of course, we supported teams through office hours and other sort of ad hoc recordings to keep them going during what was, a difficult time for everyone. Next slide is just to give you a little idea of the timeline, and then we'll move on to the next slide. Is we started scoping this issue in May, and that continued into June. The challenge took place July into August, over four to 6 weeks. And right now we've moved into the post-challenge period, but things aren't really done just yet. Next slide, please. Before we move into the next steps, I just pulled out a quick quote. This one is my sort of favorite, which is this takeaway that showed that all of the work that we put into the Reimagine series actually does have immense value for the anchor partners, who said that it would take about 6 to 12 months to achieve what these teams achieved in just 4 weeks. Next slide, please. And so, like I said before, it's not really done yet. Pixera Global actually is engaging in ideation sessions with both of those anchor partners to actually move from ideation into solutions, solution implementation. We have a forthcoming report coming up, and of course, we're going to be doing a long-term check-in in June about 2021, and also, of course, looking for the opportunity for further pro bono engagement in the long term. Next slide, please. And very quickly wanted to point to another program that came about very, very quickly, rapid development with Medtronic Foundation, which is the skills-based volunteering program for COVID-19, which allowed Medtronic employees to contribute their skills to health systems during the pandemic. Just this past August, 13 Medtronic employees with some level of clinical expertise trained more than 100 healthcare workers, and those healthcare workers then went on to train about 250 more in Bangladesh. And this program is going to be moving on to Myanmar and Texas next month. So I know we're running short at time, so I'm going to go into very rapid fire here. If we can go to the next slide. And skip over to the next one, please. Thank you. So we did not have all the answers, and we learned a lot in the process. I want to go through 3 buckets of what we learned, very rapid fire, before we move to the Q&A. In the first section, next slide, please, on the sort of internal partnership side, next slide. is without a doubt, virtual engagements are different than connecting face-to-face, but they do work. See this as an opportunity for employees to meaningfully and purposefully connect to the world outside of their homes. Next slide. Listening to your employees, which I know all of you do really well. Understanding their passions, values, and motivations is important, but at the same time, seek to understand how much time and brain power they can commit to a project in a given week and design around that. The Medtronic Foundation project I mentioned came out of those same actions that the administrators were leading. Next slide. This is a bit of a no-brainer, but the more connected your global pro bono programs can be to your overall engagement strategy, the stronger and clearer it will be to those participating, both on the employee side and on the nonprofit side, and the greater ability you'll have to draw on leadership and other critical internal partners. And skip one ahead, please. Mindfulness, which some of us are practicing right now, I hope, and authenticity. Recognizing the constraints of the community. In the nonprofit sector, it's a trying time. And for a recent racial justice program, we actually got a response from an organization saying, hey, we have too much work to do and we have an influx of donations. Now is not the right time. Be ready to hear no. On the next slide, with the RCHS challenge, make sure that you're listening to what keeps organizations up at night. I showed you how long we actually spent on the scoping process. Make sure there's a shared understanding of what can actually be delivered by teams during what is a difficult and unique time. And this next one I really like is be specific or you're gonna risk coming off as authentic. Greenwashing, woke-washing is real and you will be called out for it. Try the issue area you're trying to address and walk the talk. And for external partnerships, we're gonna go rapid fire here in 30 seconds. Next slide, please. Think about your business allies, relationships, partners, new partners that you'd like to work with in order to be more strategic. Don't let go of that goal if that's the goal for you during this time. Next slide, think on a national and local level. Don't be afraid to do both. The Reimagine Community Health Series was both national, state level, and has the potential to have global lessons learned. And then finally, the next slide, there were over 19 stakeholders, both internal and external, to our social impact organizations who contributed their perspectives to the pro bono experience over 4 weeks. Make sure you include them and close the feedback loop. Those same partners right now are being revisited in the solution implementation phase of the Reimagine Community Health Systems Challenge. And that is it from me. I will now hand it over to Veronica for the Q&A.
Hi, thank you guys so much. That was a lot of really, really great information. Before we get to the questions, there were a lot of comments in the chat asking about the slides. The slides will be available to everyone. There's a lot of great information on those slides. I know it's hard to read them really quick, so you guys will get access to that. I did kind of want to start off because I saw someone mention it in the chat. I think, Elizabeth, it was you that you said this is really like a double pandemic, you know, and there's just so much going on. And on top of that, you know, election year and, you know, fires and a lot of things going on that as CSR professionals, we're busier than ever. So it's kind of a question for me. I don't think anyone asked it in the chat, but, you know, I'm not sure what level people are at, if they are thinking about starting a pro bono or maybe they already have one, but wondering about capacity of staff and what's kind of the, in a perfect world, what kind of staff and time commitment do you need to really do really effective pro bono, you know, program? And Elizabeth, I'll start with you, and then if Casey or Hassan also wants to chime in.
So much. It's a great question. Yes, I think that right now, thinking about starting programming, being able to use volunteers, it's not so easy right now to paint a classroom or to do a beach cleanup. So doing skilled-based volunteering offers the opportunity to continue to engage your employees. I would say that there's no perfect solution, no perfect amount of time for a pro bono program. However, having said that, I will say that it is an investment that requires more than simply an afternoon. There needs to be work done, and Casey referenced this when she talked about scope. There needs to be work done to identify nonprofits, to scope out the project, to have the volunteers show up. And in general, you need between 2 and 3 hours of volunteers' time in order to have an impactful experience for the nonprofit. And as I often say, the reason we want impactful experiences for the nonprofit is first and foremost, it's what's best for the nonprofit, but also it means that volunteers feel that their work has been engaged most fully. So you want to have that 2 to 3 hours at a minimum if you're doing a day of service, and you need to acknowledge that you're going to have some pre and post work. I'll turn it over to Casey for her responses with one final comment that she referenced, that you can start small, and that's okay. So you can have 10 volunteers and 1 day of service to see how it goes. That works. Casey?
Yeah, and I echo that. It all depends on size and scope. So in my team, I have one full-time individual who manages all of our employee community engagement programs. And so she also has support from Common Impact, and we do bring in a couple other contractors to help us along the way during busy times. I'd say that right now, because we're in the middle of our actual 10 different events, she's probably spending about 70% of her time, but that is managing 10 events, 67 different projects, and hundreds of employee volunteers. So you can take that in light of, you know, the time commitment starting out smaller. But we have found that being able to partner with an outside expert allows my full-time team member to really concentrate on what it takes culturally to get engagement and buy-in, et cetera, and then have somebody who's an expert at the nonprofit assessment standpoint, so we can really utilize our resources, our people resources most efficiently.
Yeah, I think I'll just add a quick tip in there is just looking for efficiencies and changing and pivoting to virtual. One of the things I mentioned earlier was asynchronous recordings. You know, if information needs to get from an organization to the team, and that's going to help that team move the needle on that project, let them record the information, although it's not as dynamic, at a time that suits them, and let the teams listen in at a time that suits them, give them that flexibility.
No, that's great. And I think something that stuck with me there is the start small. I think hopefully other people are like this too. Sometimes I get so stuck on it has to be perfect and everything all the things have to be in place, but you know, sometimes it's that progress, not perfection kind of thing. And yeah, just taking a small project and seeing how that goes, I think that's great. There's another question for everybody that I think a lot of the attendees will be interested in. Someone asked if you could share the application process and what that looks like for employees interested in pro bono and skills volunteering, and how, you know, employees can get involved with that and what you guys do to connect those employees to those opportunities. Casey, I don't know if you want to start with that one.
Sure. So we work really hard, like I said, scoping out the project and really utilize our partnership with Common Impact to identify the specific skill sets that we're looking for before we even begin doing recruiting. We also then rely on our internal employee volunteer project leads to help leverage their network, because they're very familiar with each project. So their understanding of the different core needs from a employee skill set. And then we reach out to subsets of employees, so we don't just do a blanket all employee email for recruiting. And then we really do define that project for them and then ask them about what they're bringing to the table when they're applying to become a part of the program. So it's a multi-level process, and we do that always looking back at what the project scope is and project needs are to make sure we have the right people. And occasionally we will ask some of our senior leaders to nominate specific people to participate if we have a gap in a skill set, or if we feel like we need a really targeted individual who could step in at a certain level to fill some of those needs.
Great. Does anyone else have anything to add there?
I would just chime in again with sort of a simple recommendation with, for example, Medtronic Foundation's rapid response COVID-19 projects. These were short-term. There was clearly a need over in Bangladesh in this case for clinical experience. And normally for the Global Innovation Fellows program that they have, we have a 30 to 45-minute interview process that's part of the selection process. I agree with Casey on not going as wide and targeting in on specific skills, but also be realistic about the timing again. Is that long, is that 30 to 40 minutes really needed to interview and get the right person on board? Probably not. So they had us doing, for example, 15-minute interviews, and really we got what we needed in that time in order to select participants.
Yeah, I think that that is well covered. I will just say that look for every opportunity to use the program to meet multiple needs. So you want to serve the community? Absolutely. You want to promote the work that you're doing and the ways in which you're investing in communities? Look for that too. You want to build leadership development opportunities? Find ways to make that a part of the conversation as well, so that at the end of it, you really do have a program that is multifaceted, even if it is only engaging a smaller number of individuals.
Awesome. Sorry, you can probably see me distracted. There are so many questions coming in for you guys. It's like a hot topic, and there's no way we're going to get to them all. So I just wanted to tell the attendees, please use this platform. You can message, Hasna, Elizabeth, Casey. You can chat with them in the rooms. But I am going to try to stick to the ones that are maybe more general for the whole group. One that did come in is, what type of pro bono and volunteering opportunities have you seen that are best received by employees, that have the highest participation and employees say they have the best experience with it? Hasna, do you maybe have a...
Sure. I mean, I think the first thing that comes to mind again is targeted skill set. We had employees, from Medtronic saying, I feel helpless and I am very skilled and I'm stuck at home, and what can I do with my skills to help some of the, very pressing needs that I'm seeing within my community or globally. So again, targeting towards clinical expertise. That was a program model that was very specific. I think also just being realistic about the time commitment. I think we always get feedback that it was more, more time was put in than needed. I think we were trying to be extra transparent about the timing that was actually going to be needed, and not giving that wide range of, 2 to 8 hours per week. That's likely to get you more applications and more interest. People are discussing this with their families and managing so much right now. So just be super transparent in the application process.
Yeah, and I'd add on to that too. I don't think there's been a specific type of project that's resonated most. The ones that have been most successful are the ones where we can clearly show our employees how their skills are going to make a difference for that end consumer, that end customer. So whether it's a marketing plan and trying to target a new recruitment strategy for women, we actually have deliberately followed back up with people afterwards to try and share the long-term impact. So an example of that is we did a recruitment strategy for a Boys and Girls Club. They wound up developing a brand new women's engagement program that has been modeled for the entire Boys and Girls Clubs movement. And so we went back and deliberately shared that with our employees so they can see, again, that connection to the true impact. And that's what really drives employee engagement, if they can understand that from the beginning.
I agree with all of this. I think it's looking at what that triple win is, and good for business, good for the employee, good for the community. Those are the projects that are the best. And each of that is going to be dependent upon individual employees, skill sets, ability to commit time. So assess against that pro bono sweet spot and see what is that win. And that often is what's going to be the most impactful and what employers are going to be most excited by.
Thank you guys so much. That went really, really fast. And again, like I said, we have a ton of questions. I think you guys are able to see the chat and feed look too. If you guys want to go in there and answer the questions, thank you guys so much for joining us today. And to all of the attendees, I feel like we could have had another hour to talk about all of this. And I know, at Excel, we're always challenging ourselves to evolve our program. This is very helpful for me personally, and I'm sure also for the attendees. So I did want to say the next session will begin after a brief 5-minute break. So feel free to go stretch, get a beverage refill. But you can even go check out our sponsors in the exhibit tab, and you can maybe even check out the networking tab if you haven't yet. I know it's just 5 minutes, but there's different groups in there with different actual topics that you can discuss with, I think, up to 25 people, or you can just go into a general group. And you can find your workshop, the next workshop in the agenda bar. So thank you guys so much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the day. Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.